Welcome, intrepid explorers of history, to a tale that defies belief, a catastrophe so peculiar, so utterly absurd, that it sounds more like a dark fairy tale than a real-life event. Forget fire, floods, or earthquakes. Today, we journey back to a moment when an entire city district was submerged, not by water, but by a towering, unstoppable wave of sticky, sweet, and ultimately deadly, molasses. Our story begins in the bustling, historic north end of Boston, Massachusetts, on a strangely warm winter's day, January 15, 1919. The air, usually crisp and biting in New England at this time of year, held an unseasonable mildness. It was the kind of day that lulled you into a false sense of security, obscuring the colossal danger lurking just beneath the surface of everyday life. Perched precariously on the waterfront, dominating the landscape near Copp's Hill, stood an immense, riveted steel tank. This gargantuan container, 50 feet tall and 90 feet in diameter, belonged to the Purity Distilling Company. It wasn't just big, it was a behemoth, holding over 2 million gallons of raw molasses, a viscous, syrupy cargo destined for conversion into industrial alcohol. Its dark, sweet contents hummed with fermentation, a process generating subtle but relentless internal pressure against the aging steel. For months, residents of the adjacent neighborhood had complained about strange rumblings and creaking sounds emanating from the colossal tank. There were even visible leaks, a constant seepage of dark syrup staining its sides and forming sticky puddles at its base, a curious, if somewhat unsanitary, attraction for local children who would sometimes scoop up handfuls. Yet, these warnings, like whispers in the wind, went largely unheeded. The company prioritized production, profits over safety, and a catastrophic oversight was brewing, literally, within the tank's metallic skin. The structural integrity of the giant cylinder was severely compromised, its steel plates too thin, its rivets poorly installed, and its construction hurried without proper blueprints or professional oversight. It was a ticking time bomb, filled with a substance so innocuous, so commonplace, that no one could possibly fathom the destructive power it was about to unleash. Then, at precisely 12:30 p.m., the unthinkable happened. With a roar described by witnesses as a thunderclap, shotgun blast, and even the passing of a train, the tank exploded. Not burst, not ruptured, but exploded, its massive steel plates tearing apart as if made of paper, rocketing shrapnel through the air. What followed was a spectacle of horror and disbelief. A monstrous wave of molasses, 25 feet high and 160 feet wide, surged forth. Moving at an astonishing 35 miles per hour, this dark, glistening tsunami ripped through the busy commercial street below. Buildings crumpled like cardboard, their foundations no match for the liquid battering ram. The force was so immense that a nearby elevated train structure was twisted from its tracks, a train car flung into the street, and a firehouse was completely demolished, its heavy fire engines tossed about like toys. People caught in its path had mere seconds to comprehend the impossible before they were engulfed. A quiet lunch hour was instantly transformed into an unimaginable nightmare, a sticky, suffocating vortex of destruction. The immediate aftermath of the molasses wave was a scene of utter pandemonium and grim chaos, a sugary apocalypse that defied logic. The roar of the explosion was quickly replaced by the screams of the trapped and injured, and the sickening crunch of collapsing structures. What remained of Commercial Street was a dystopian landscape of wreckage, with buildings reduced to splintered timber and twisted metal, all submerged in a knee-deep, sometimes waist-deep, ocean of thick, dark molasses. This wasn't merely a flood, the molasses, initially hot from fermentation, quickly cooled in the January air, becoming incredibly dense and viscous. It was like moving through wet concrete, or quicksand, trapping its victims in an inescapable embrace. Animals, horses, dogs, cats, struggled and suffocated. Humans, too, found themselves unable to move, their limbs ensnared, their lungs filling with the suffocating syrup. First responders rushed to the scene, their disbelief quickly turning to grim determination. Police officers and members of the Boston Fire Department were among the first to arrive, their boots sinking deep into the sweet, clinging mire. But they were ill-equipped for such an unprecedented disaster. Standard rescue techniques were useless against the molasses. Ladders disappeared into the sticky depths, ropes became saturated and impossible to handle, and even walking was an arduous, exhausting task. The nearby USS Nantucket training facility quickly dispatched hundreds of naval cadets, their discipline and sheer numbers proving invaluable. These young men waded into the goo, often on their hands and knees, pulling out survivors and searching for the missing. It was a desperate, heartbreaking effort, made all the more difficult by the fact that the victims were not only trapped but also freezing. The molasses, despite its initial warmth, quickly became frigid, accelerating hypothermia in those caught within its sticky grasp. The grim recovery operation stretched on for days. Divers were called in, but visibility in the opaque molasses was zero, making their task nearly impossible. They had to feel their way through the wreckage, often encountering bodies still standing upright, preserved in a macabre tableau by the thick syrup. Rescuers often had to use axes to hack through the hardened molasses to free the dead. The sheer number of fatalities, 21 souls, shocked the city. Countless more were severely injured, many suffering from broken bones, internal trauma, and respiratory damage from inhaling the noxious fumes and the molasses itself. The full human cost, however, extended beyond immediate death and injury. Many survivors carried the psychological scars of that day for the rest of their lives, haunted by the memory of the sweet, suffocating tide. The air, for weeks and even months afterward, hung heavy with the sickly sweet smell of fermentation and decay. Questions immediately began to swirl: how could this possibly have happened? Who was responsible for turning a common food product into a weapon of mass destruction? The public demanded answers, and a furious debate ignited over accountability. The horrifying calamity unleashed by the bursting tank set the stage for one of the most protracted and precedent-setting legal battles in American history. The public outcry was deafening, and over 100 lawsuits were filed against the Purity Distilling Company. Families of the deceased, the injured, and property owners who had lost everything sought justice and compensation. The task of assigning blame for such a bizarre and unprecedented disaster fell to the courts, and what followed was a meticulous, years-long investigation that peeled back layers of corporate negligence and shoddy workmanship. The legal proceedings dragged on for 6 agonizing years, becoming a marathon of testimony and expert analysis. The company initially attempted to deflect responsibility, blaming anarchists or saboteurs, a common scapegoat in the post-World War I era of social unrest. However, their desperate claims quickly unraveled under intense scrutiny. The turning point came with the meticulous work of the structural engineer, Hugh W. McDougall. This expert witness, tasked with examining the tank's failure, conducted an exhaustive and pioneering forensic investigation. He meticulously recreated conditions, studied blueprints, analyzed witness accounts, and even experimented with molasses viscosity and pressure. The structural engineer's findings were damning and unequivocal. The tank, he concluded, was an engineering nightmare. It had been constructed too hastily, with steel that was too thin for the immense pressure it contained, especially when the molasses fermented and generated gases. The rivet holes were poorly aligned, indicating rushed and incompetent workmanship, and the tank had never been properly inspected or tested with water before being filled with millions of gallons of product. Crucially, the company had ignored repeated warnings from its own employees and the public about the tanks creaking and leaking. The final verdict, delivered in 1925, found the company solely responsible for the disaster. It was ordered to pay damages totaling around $1 million, an astronomical sum at the time, equivalent to tens of millions of dollars today. This landmark case established a critical precedent for corporate accountability and the importance of stringent safety regulations in industrial construction. The tragedy profoundly impacted engineering practices and building codes across the nation. No longer could companies cut corners with impunity. The expectation shifted towards ensuring public safety through rigorous design, construction, and inspection protocols. Even today, over a century later, the echoes of the Great Molasses Flood linger. Residents of the historic district sometimes claim that on hot summer days, a faint, sweet smell of molasses still wafts through the streets, a ghostly reminder of the day Boston was drowned in syrup. The incident stands as a bizarre yet profound lesson from history. Even the most seemingly innocuous industrial endeavors, when handled with negligence and disregard for safety, can unleash unimaginable destruction. It's a testament to the power of overlooked details and the enduring importance of vigilance in safeguarding human lives against preventable catastrophe.